I think it is important for your listeners to know that psychological safety isn't the norm. Right? It isn't that, workplaces have psychological safety unless someone has come along and done something toxic and broken it, and then they're bad and awful. And it's psychological safety actually is pretty special. It exists. It can be built. It's a learning environment. It's sort of a growth mindset at the team level, but it has to be built. And the only reason I think this is important to say is that there's people get anxious that because they don't have it, that means they're deficient or their organizations are deficient. And I say, no, you just have work to do.
Yes, we all have work to do. In the next 45 minutes, you're going to learn directly from Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson, a pioneer in psychological safety and in failing well. Wait, isn't that an oxymoron? Failing well? Not necessarily. I can't wait for you to hear my conversation with Amy.
Let's do this. Let's talk about talk.
Welcome to Talk About Talk podcast episode number 175, Psychological Safety and Failing Well with Professor Amy Edmondson. My name is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki, and I'm an executive communication coach. Please just call me Andrea. Through my work at Talk About Talk, I coach ambitious executives to elevate their communication skills so that they can communicate with confidence and credibility. To learn more about what I do, please head over to talkabouttalk.com, where you can read about the coaching and the many workshops that I run. Plus, there are lots of free resources for you there. Just scroll down to the bottom of the homepage. You can also find a brand new archetypes quiz where you can learn which archetype resonates with you and your professional identity. This is all input to your personal brand. You can also get free coaching from me by signing up for my email newsletter. Head over to talkabouttalk.com to sign up now. Okay, let's get into this. Years ago, I had the privilege of taking Professor Amy Edmondson's doctoral course at Harvard Business School called Field Research Methods. Fast forward to today, many, many years later, I regularly coach executives and medical and healthcare professionals, as you'll hear, whether it's through one-on-one coaching sessions or corporate workshops, on some of the phenomena that Amy taught me and some of the concepts that she pioneered, including psychological safety. Recently, Amy published a new book called Right Kind of Wrong: The Science of Failing Well. After I read the book, I emailed Amy and I asked her if I could interview her for this podcast. And I was thrilled that she immediately agreed. To say Amy's work is impactful and prolific would be an understatement. So, my goal with this interview is to ask Amy the questions that I know you would ask, questions focused on communication skills, and possibly questions that differ from the questions that she typically gets from many of the other interviews that she's done. Here, we're going to focus on our communication and our mindset as leaders and as communicators. We have a lot to talk about here. So let me introduce Amy, and then we're going to get right into the interview. At the end, as always, I'm going to summarize with 3 learnings, 3 things that I want to reinforce for you. Sound good? Okay. Amy C. Edmondson is the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at the Harvard Business School, a chair established to support the study of human interactions that lead to the creation of successful enterprises that contribute to the betterment of society. Let me just say, Amy is perfect for that chair. Amy studies teaming, psychological safety, and organizational learning, and she's authored 7 books and over 75 cases and articles. She's been recognized by the biannual Thinkers 50 Global Ranking of Management Thinkers since 2011, and she was most recently ranked number 1 in 2021 and 2023. She also received that organization's Breakthrough Idea Award in 2019 and Talent Award in 2017. In 2019, Amy published her seminal book, The Fearless Organization: Creating Psychological Safety in the Workplace for Learning, Innovation, and Growth. Her more recent book, Right Kind of Wrong: The Science of Failing Well, is due to be translated into 24 additional languages and was selected by the Financial Times and Schroders Best Business Book of the Year award. Yes, I'm going to leave links to these books in the show notes, along with links to all of the other books and papers that we mentioned in our conversation. Here we go. Thank you so much, Amy, for being here today to talk to us about psychological safety and also failing well.
Thrilled to be here.
Okay, so I've already shared the definition of psychological safety, but I have a question for you. Sometimes when I'm talking to my clients, especially when psychological safety comes up in conversation in coaching sessions, and they're less familiar with what it is, I'll describe what it is, and then I'll say, simply think of it as a culture where it's safe to take risks. And I wanted to double check with you. Is that a safe short form definition?
It absolutely is.
Okay.
It's perfect. And this is coming up a lot for me and in my work and research in organizations because of the popularity of the concept. I think that naturally implies lots of misunderstandings and misconceptions, and there's really two things that people are saying now that are frustrating them and certainly frustrate me. And one is they say, well, we love this psychological safety thing, but we have to care about performance. It's like, well, that's the whole point, right? That in fact, without this climate where you believe risk-taking is safe, it's pretty hard to perform well.
Right.
World with uncertainty and interdependence. And then the other is, which breaks my heart, is that they're starting to say people are using this as a weapon. They're saying, you can't give me feedback because then you're taking away my psychological safety. Like, hold on here. In fact, that's dead wrong, right? Because it's about having an environment where, of course, we give each other feedback. And, we give it as respectfully and as accurately as we're capable, but it will never be perfect. So we have to understand we're going to get it wrong, but we're going to do our best, and let's muddle through.
Right. I love how your two seminal books here are so not mutually exclusive. I mean, there's so much overlap. You just said getting it wrong. It's like, well, so this is a question that I was going to ask you later on, but recently I've been doing some workshops for some physicians in Australia. So there's a 14-hour time difference. That's always fun. And I told them that I was going to be interviewing you, and I asked them if they have any questions. So I do have a question for you from one of the physicians there. But they told me in real time when I was doing this workshop that now in Australia, specifically in medicine, but maybe even generally, it is, how did they say this? It's not that it's against the law to not create a culture of psychological safety, but it's coming up in courts of law. I see you nodding your head. This isn't news to you.
I've heard this. I don't know the details, just similar to you. But it's so well-intentioned and so deeply problematic.
Is it against the law to not create a culture of psychological safety, or is it that it comes up? One of the physicians said, I think it comes up when people are accused of bullying.
Yes. And probably, I don't know how bullying is one of those phenomena that sometimes, certainly not always, but sometimes one person's bully is the other person's directive management. So we have to, I think before we can call bullying or removing psychological safety a crime, we better be very clear on what the behaviors are that are illegal, not what the outcome is could be highly subjective in someone's mind, right?
Exactly.
I don't like you, you're a bully, okay, therefore I report you. And so it's very tricky, right? Because I think what worries me the most about that kind of, again, well-intentioned effort, to ban the bad behaviors is that it's because it makes it so serious. Breaking the law is a pretty serious event.
Right.
It makes it so serious that it actually might inadvertently lead to hiding rather than to learning. Right?
Yeah.
So, if one consequence of the truth coming out is you're going to jail, then there's all the more reason why we're going to, circle around and just be very quiet about what's really going on around here.
Mm-hmm. So unfortunately and ironically, there may be a negative unintended consequence. That said, there is so much research, which, I mean, you did much of it, and
Right.
I read much of it, but not even all, not clearly not all of it, because there's so much
So,
evidence that psychological
right.
safety is one of the key factors contributing to team performance. Full
Yes.
stop.
Yes. And my research, my own, peer-reviewed empirical research is a tiny fraction of that literature. And so
Okay.
I developed a measure long ago of psychological safety. I did some early studies, and the measure and the idea have been taken up by many researchers. So if you count the healthcare literatures, and I do, there's well over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies showing what you just said, which is that psychological safety is associated with higher performing teams. And that's because most teams are doing work for which risk taking is necessary. And I don't mean wild-eyed, crazy risks, but the I need help, or I think I've made a mistake, or I have a dissenting view. And the performance is helped by those behaviors, and those behaviors are not easy for most of us.
Right. And going back to the beginning where you were talking about some of the things that you've heard going on that maybe aren't focused on, the true spirit of psychological safety. When this issue of, well, we do have business objectives that we need to achieve, I throw up the 2x2 on the screen, showing psychological safety on one axis, and the other axis is accountability. I see you nodding your head. It makes me so
I love that one. I drew that. I conceptualized that in the middle of a class one day, 20 years ago, because I realized that so many people have this kind of false dichotomy that can either care about or uphold high standards of performance and accountability, or we can have psychological safety, or we find some optimal place in the middle. It's like, no. It's two different dimensions. And so
they are,
and then
they're orthogonal. They're orthogonal.
they're orthogonal.
Yeah.
And once drawn, then you realize, oh, there really are four quadrants here, right? There really is a zone where both are low. And, that's a pretty sad state of affairs. Nobody wants to work there. I call it the empathy zone. Right? No accountability, no psychological safety. Kind of, you try to take care of yourself, but you're not terribly motivated.
Right.
And then, of course, the one that people are worrying about is the comfort zone, where it's like high psychological safety, but no accountability, no commitment to high standards. And, I always think that might be fun for a day or a week or so, but it's not really what it means to be a thriving, adult human being or child, for that matter. So the one, of course, that I see far more often, and I want to come back to this in a moment, is the anxiety zone, where the accountability is apparently high around here. The need to perform well is high around here, but psychological safety feels low. And so that's the anxiety zone. That's where I'd like to do a good job, but I really don't feel safe engaging in the behaviors I need to do a good job.
Right.
And then, of course,
that's like the burnout zone too, right?
That's the burnout zone. Absolutely. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And then the place we all want our teams to be is the learning zone, or which I also think is the high performance zone. And that's where we feel a sense of accountability or ownership and a commitment to high standards. And we feel able to speak up, to get help, to, offer a different point of view and so forth. And in an uncertain world, that's the only kind of climate or culture that's going to work.
Yeah. I'm even thinking about even in families, right? When children, like teenagers, are talking to their parents or what, it's even beyond words.
Yes. Oh, yes. In fact, I didn't think, I write about that in Right Kind of Wrong, because it's the last thing you want is in a family situation is to have kids be afraid to tell you the truth, because then they might, first of all, you don't know what's going on, and that's dangerous. Second of all, they might literally, get into the car of a drunk friend rather than call you because they're afraid you're going to yell at them.
Right. So we can extrapolate. I find that with most of the things that I coach, it's communication skills. It's that people are like, oh, this would work in my personal life too. I said, yes, it will. So before we go any further, I want to read this question from this woman Dr. Jeanette Wright. She is an anesthetist in Australia. And this is her question. She's very familiar with psychological safety, and most of her colleagues are as well. So here's her question. In an operating theater environment during a critical incident, there can be a loss of psychological safety. For example, harsh words or time-critical tasks that are ordered rather than requested, even in a team who, under normal conditions, have a great culture of speaking up and collegiality. What is the best way to maintain or renew psychological safety during these circumstances? I read that word for word from what she sent me. Yeah, so you can imagine her in this high stakes OR, right?
It's such an important question. And, I think it happens in the OR, but it also, we were just talking about families, and it happens in families. It happens in couples and relationships. If you and I had a theory that depended, or a practice that depended on being perfect and delivering the perfect response every time, that would be a lousy theory, because no, we're fallible human beings. So this situation will happen. Fortunately, I believe it is. There is a path to recovery. The sooner the better. But the most important steps on this path are, first, name it, acknowledge it. Oops, that was not how I really wanted that to come out. Now, you may not be enough present to do that immediately, but do it as soon as you realize that something happened that is potentially harmful for the future. And then apologize. An apology just means I was scared, and I reacted too quickly, and I don't think that had a positive effect, and I'll do better next time. And then keep working at doing better next time. So the most important thing is that it's discussable, right? We're all going to fall off the balance beam, but when we fall off, we shouldn't be ashamed, embarrassed. We shouldn't make it undiscussable, which it often is. It's like, did you see that? Behind closed doors, people oh, that was awful. Well, I'll never feel safe again there. It's like, just get out, get on top of it as quickly as possible and speak truthfully about it. And the very act of doing that is demonstrating the kind of candor that, after all, is what we're looking for.
Right. So when I'm coaching my clients and they're looking for almost like a prescription. So I understand what it is. I've seen the 7-question survey. I understand the definitions, the mistakes people make, and so on and so on. What do I do? And so I say, think about your mindset, think about your words, and think about your actions. And you're actually talking about taking an action and the words combination, right? So you're saying, okay, later on, to admit fallibility. That's one thing. And the other one that I often mention, that I've heard you say many times, is when someone comes to you with an issue or even a mistake that they made, you say, thank you for telling me. Tell me more.
Yeah, thank you for telling me. Maybe even, depending on the situation, how can I help? What ideas do you have? So it's at least first and foremost about the what next. I mean, our instincts as humans, I think, is to look back, like, well, how did that happen? And why were you so stupid? But no, we don't say that. It's because you can't do anything about the past, but you sure can do something about the future, and that's your goal. That's your job. That's your goal. So I would say, it's thanks for telling me. How can I help? Or what now? What ideas do you have?
Yeah. So being future oriented is actually, I think I probably implicitly was coaching people to do that, but not explicitly. So I love that. Be future, not past oriented, right? There'll be enough.
And I'm a big fan of after action review, right? I believe we can learn a great deal, and we must learn a great deal from the past, especially from failures. But it's just that what we're talking about here is, how do you react in that moment?
Yeah.
Because, in a sense, if someone's coming to you with a mistake or any kind of bad news, this is already a difficult moment for them.
Yeah.
Your job is simply to not make it worse, right? In fact, it's to make it better. Demonstrate that you welcome it, to demonstrate that this is what we do. This is what good looks like around here.
Yeah. And back to the example from the question from the physician in Australia, if later on you go back and apologize, you're demonstrating that, fallibility firsthand. And especially
Yeah.
if you're a leader, you have a huge impact on the culture. So you're reinforcing it in real time and you're course correcting, right? So
Yes. Yes. And if you're expecting others to admit mistakes and you're expecting others to ask for help and admit their human fallibility, I promise you it won't work if you're unwilling to do the same.
So we keep saying the word mistake, and I want to shift into failing well. And I want to start by asking you what you think about this. And it's about vocabulary. And I think maybe because I've evolved my career into becoming a communication coach, I'm more conscious of and hopefully careful with the language and vocabulary that I use.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I talk about with my clients, and especially if they're in career transition or they're making plans for the future, right? And talking about the difference between disappointment and regret. So I say this is my take on this, which is you make the best decision that you have with the information you have at the time. You may or may not be disappointed, but if you truly did make the best decision with the information you had, then you really can't have regrets.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's great. First of all, I love the word disappointment. I use it a lot because it's part of a self-training practice to not say, "Oh, this is awful. This is the end of the world," when
Yeah,
obviously it isn't, and to say instead, "Oh, this is disappointing." Right? I'd wanted that to work. Right? I'd
right.
wanted to whatever. So disappointment is a very powerful word because it's it's clean and clear and not exaggerated, right?
Yes.
And regret, yeah, regret is quite interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, because it does imply that you would love to rewind the videotape and do it differently. And that's
Exactly.
not always appropriate. It's appropriate for some things, like that operating room story. Again, you'd love to, if you were that surgeon, you would love to rewind the videotape and not lose your cool, but you didn't, so that's okay.
Yeah.
You do your best, you go forward. But for the things that we do and try in life that we think might work or will work, but they don't, you must not feel regret, because if you do, you will then hold yourself back and you'll do what I call playing not to lose rather than going for it. Rather than do your best, it's sort of, I'll just take the safe, I'll try the
Yeah.
safe things.
Yeah. So both of your books, and I think maybe all of your research is really grounded in this kind of growth mindset,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Ah,
yes.
it really is.
And I love the growth mindset work. Carol Dweck's and others, her students and others as well, because I think it's so consistent with what is needed in a world that keeps changing, and for people who want to keep achieving or doing better, keep
Right.
learning and growing and improving. And it's so tempting. And I think the world is constantly sending us messages that we're supposed to be perfect, or we're supposed to get it right, or hit our targets, or win awards. And it's so tempting to get caught up in those rather than in this idea, which is true, that we can keep learning and growing.
Right. Learning, I say learning as opposed to performing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you share with us the three archetypes of failure? First of all, I
Yeah.
also love archetypes, so you're speaking my language there. But so categorizing and defining, I think this also really helps people think about leveraging their growth mindset. By the way, I'm sure you notice this too in what you do. There's like a self-selection. People who are listening to this podcast probably have a growth mindset. Otherwise, they wouldn't select
It's
themselves.
probably true. It's probably
Yeah.
true. Although I bet there are people who are, growth mindset curious, right? That
Oh, yeah. That's
they
true.
know and want to learn and grow, but they also are, like so many of us, not immune to the pressures in their organizations or the pressures in society, that can reinforce more of a
Mm.
performance mindset.
Yeah, I want to talk about that self-awareness, but first, can you
Sure.
share the definitions
Yes.
of the
Yes.
three
So
archetypes?
I'll rewind for just a moment and say mistake. I'll start with mistake, then I'll describe the three kinds of failure. So a mistake is an unintended deviation from a known practice or process, right? And so I think that's important because a mistake is a kind of a particular category where it's a nonsensical word unless there already is existing knowledge or process that gets the result we want. Okay, and we have a mistake, and it's got to be unintended, right? And an intended mistake is an oxymoron that doesn't exist. That's just sabotage or carelessness or whatever. Okay, so and forget careless. Let's wipe that one out. Because that's a different thing. Anyway, because you can be careless and make a mistake. So okay, so and why I started with mistake was that in ordinary sort of talk, people use those words, mistake and failure, interchangeably, and they're not. So a failure is an undesired outcome.
Right.
And there are three kinds. And one is what I call a basic failure. And a basic failure has a single cause, usually a mistake. Right? So it's in familiar territory, right? If I text and drive and get into an accident, that's a basic failure. I did something I shouldn't have done, and I got a bad outcome. A complex failure is one that has a handful of factors contributing to it, any one of which on its own wouldn't create a failure, but the unfortunate combination of factors gave rise to an undesired outcome. Supply chain breakdown, multi-causal. We got some workers who were sick. We got some weather patterns over there. Boom, comes together.
The ideal perfect.
The perfect storm, exactly. And both of those kinds of failures are undesired and largely preventable, right? At our best, with incredible vigilance and communication skills, we can prevent most of those kinds of failures in familiar territory. The third kind, intelligent failures, are the undesired outcome of a thoughtful foray into new territory. So these are really the, again, undesired results of experiments. You can't have regrets about these because you could not have known in advance that it wouldn't work. You had good reason to believe it could work, in fact. I mean, you're a scientist in a lab running an experiment, and you think, ooh, this makes sense. Let's get the data. Let's see if it's true. Lo and behold, you're wrong. Disappointing, to be sure. A failure, to be sure, but an intelligent one, and the one that we need to learn to welcome and celebrate because they bring us new information.
And this categorization of, I guess, the types of failures is what helps us reconcile this, on one hand, societal obsession with avoiding failure and performing at a high level.
Right.
And on the other hand, what we keep hearing about fail fast and fail hard, right? It's like, what?
Right. No, bad idea in the operating room, right?
Yeah.
Right. Not something you'd want to do in passenger air travel. There are contexts in which we need to do everything in our power to ensure a successful outcome, particularly high stakes, high risk contexts. So part of the reason why I articulate this typology and these archetypes is primarily to help us, make the important distinctions in our brains that we need to make to truly welcome the new knowledge that comes from intelligent failures. Because if failure is all lumped into our mind as one idea, one category, there's just no way, even the happy talk about failure, fail fast, whatever, it's not going to work psychologically to make us truly feel okay about failure. We can only feel okay about failure when we have the cognitive distinctions around the types of failure. And then it frees us up to engage in more smart risks.
Right.
I point out in the book that, in fact, name a field. The people who are most successful are not most successful because they're failure free. They've become most successful because they've failed more often, than the rest of us. Right? They've been willing to go try hard things and willing to stomach the disappointment of failure so that they can get better and better and better at their craft.
Mm-hmm. So the title, when I hear you describing these archetypes, and when I was reading about the archetypes, it occurred to me, like, I didn't quite get that when I read the title of the book, right, kind of wrong. And now I'm like,
Right.
there are kinds of
Intelligent values.
wrong that we want to avoid, and there are kinds of wrong that we are totally okay with. They are right.
Exactly. But they're all, they're all wrong in a sense, in that they are all an undesired outcome. But only one type of undesired outcome is the right kind, or at least the productive kind.
Yeah. So in part 2 of the book, you talk about self-awareness and situation awareness and system awareness. And the chapter 5, I just gobbled up because I'm all about self-awareness and internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. And I was like, what? And I went back and forth between feeling sort of optimistic about the message here and then feeling pessimistic, because I remember back 20 years ago, Amy, when I was taking classes from you and also from other people, learning about heuristics, and the research shows that even the heuristics researchers make mistakes based on heuristics. And so by reading this material, by listening to you talk about it, we're learning to think about failures in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how do we leverage this insight that we have?
Well, it's so funny the way you say that's exactly the experience I have, that I toggle back and forth between feeling very hopeful about what we know and what we're capable of doing, and also feeling very depressed about it, because I'll just take myself. I will repeatedly and consistently fall into the same traps. And even Danny Kahneman, of course, who, thinking fast, thinking slow, system 1, system 2. I think part of the solution is recognizing that it is okay to have system 1 fast thinking. For, if you stop to pause, like, which way should I brush my teeth every time you do it, you'd never get through the day.
Right. Yeah.
It's good.
And many of our instincts are necessary for
right. They're necessary. They're right. You stop yourself from running out into traffic without even thinking about it, and that's good. Right. So we need all of these skilled routines that we have to sort of get through our days and do the things that we need to do. And we need to get continually better, and none of us will ever be perfect, but we need to get continually better at learning when to pause, to slow down the thinking, right? To pause, to kind of examine what you're thinking critically, examine the reflexive or heuristic-based action you're about to do, and just ask it a question. Wait a minute, is that really the useful thing to do in this moment? And I think that is it's a kind of mindfulness, right? And it's something that we can, again, we'll never be perfect, but we can get better at it. So to me, the hopefulness comes in once we become aware that self-awareness is a thing, and that thinking about your thinking is not a bad idea, not for everything. What do we have for lunch today? Who cares? But for those things where there's uncertainty and reasonably high stakes, we really do want to challenge ourselves. So I tried to, borrowing from some of, so many of the great thinkers and folks who really spent their time thinking about how to have healthy thinking. I try to just borrow some of the simple wisdom from those works and say, how should we do that? How should we do that here in business or in organizations? And the simplest rubric, which I borrow from a former mentor, Larry Wilson, is stop, challenge, choose. Right? It's just pause, learn to breathe, learn to say, okay, I'm feeling a little anxious, upset. What's going on? Well, I'm worried that such and such is going to happen. Okay, well, pause and just take a look at your thinking and say, well, how tethered to reality is that? Or is this me spiraling out of, out in again? And what other ways might there be to think about this situation? And now pick the one that is in my best interests and health and, maybe happiness, right? So if I can sort of realize, oh, that's disappointing, but not fatal. And I'm going to try harder next time. And this is what I
Yeah.
might do differently next time. Then
Yeah.
that's a healthy habit.
It is. Okay. So you're shifting me a little bit over into the optimistic as opposed to
Right.
and as you were talking, I was thinking it still is related to a growth mindset. I have to tell you this, after I'd been coaching folks, executives for a couple of years, I had this like epiphany. I looked back, it was at the end of the calendar year. I'm like, what did I learn? Like really learn about what differentiates the most successful people. And I was like, it actually is a growth mindset. And
Yes.
then a few years later, I was like, it's self-awareness, but these are not necessarily orthogonal. I think they are correlated in some ways.
I mean, I think, in order to have a growth mindset, I think you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about what you're doing and why the disappointment isn't really so awful. Because the spontaneous reaction to a failure or being wrong about something, and this is just well demonstrated in research, our spontaneous reactions are not, it's a negative emotion. That's just automatic, right? If I didn't do as well as I thought, whatever, I'm going to have a negative reaction. So the growth mindset is that superpower that comes back in and says, no, it's a learning experience, and not in a cliche way, but like what did I do that led to the outcome that I'm not happy about? And what might I do differently next time?
I love that you use the word superpower there, Amy. I love it. Okay, I'm going to ask you the 3 rapid fire questions now. Are you ready?
Okay. Yep.
First question, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Introvert, hands down.
Hands down.
Yeah.
Have you taken
No question. I've taken the Briggs, what is it?
Myers-Briggs.
Myers-Briggs. I was going to say Briggs-Myers. That's wrong.
And the Big 5. It's also in the Big 5 of social psychology, right?
Yes.
It's both of them.
Yes, it's one of the Big 5. And I was gratified to learn, though, as part of being trained as a psychologist like you, that that doesn't mean you're inept, right, in social situations. It just means it takes more energy then I, as an introvert, it means I have to recharge, and I'm happy to recharge. I have lots of opportunities to recharge. A lot of the work I do is solo at a keyboard.
Yeah. And also you may have a superpower of being a fantastic listener, which probably helps you in your research, right?
That is true. I mean, I'm not sure I got that as good as I want it to be, but it is true that as an introvert, you are a good listener and prone to listen.
Yeah. Okay, that wasn't so rapid, but I love hearing your thoughts on that. The second one, I'm curious about this one. What are your communication pet peeves?
The up lilt. So that is, let me tell you about my work. And I was just finishing this chapter. And I know it's gotten to be so common now that it almost is disallowed as a pet peeve because it's practically everybody. And I find it so much less compelling than stating it as a sentence rather than asking or implying it's a question. Plus, I think it really requires it drains the listener because the listener is sort of feeling, because it's implied by the tone, that they have to say something or respond or agree or disagree, and it's exhausting.
Yeah. So I've noticed, I labeled this phenomenon, or the kind of increasing prevalence of it, the uptick in upspeak. Yeah. And it also,
Ooh, I like that.
So Adam Grant had an article a couple of years ago in the New York Times where he talks about women purposely using weak language. So with some of my senior female leaders, I assign them to read the article, and then I say, I want to talk to you about this because depending on who you're talking to, it might be in your best interest to use upspeak, but right. I hope you're conscious of it. I hope that when you have conviction about something, you're not asking them.
Right.
Instead, you're telling them. Right?
Exactly.
Okay, question number 3. Is there a podcast or a book that you find yourself recommending the most lately?
Yes. The book, maybe it's old-fashioned to say a book, and it's not a brand new book, but it is a brilliant book, and it is called Get Rid of the Performance Review.
Oh, I don't know that
And
one.
Sam Culbert, UCLA emeritus. And it is not a book about why we shouldn't have performance reviews. It's really a book about how the way most of them unfold is not learning oriented, not helpful, not forward looking, and it's a sham. And
Oh,
it's theater that isn't working. So it needs to be replaced by what he calls the performance preview, where we look at the
ah,
future together. And my job, if I'm your manager, my job is to help you think about growth mindset again. My job is to help you do well. So I need to know what you need from me. You
yeah,
need to know what I expect or what we're trying to do. And I need to know how to most enable you. And so
right.
there's mutual learning and it's forward looking. And it's so profound and
Yeah,
so rare, but really a powerful way
yeah,
of managing performance.
yeah. It sounds like this book made a real real impression on you. That's very, I can see how it's very kind of interrelated with your topics of failure, the right kind of wrong, and psychological safety. I will put a link to that book in the show notes. And I just want to close by asking, is there anything else you want to share about the right kind of wrong, failure, psychological safety, anything else?
One thing. So I'll go full circle back to psychological safety, which, as you said, it's all interrelated, and say, I think it is important for your listeners to know that psychological safety isn't the norm, right? It isn't that, workplaces have psychological safety unless someone has come along and done something toxic and broken it, and then they're bad and awful. And it's psychological safety actually is pretty special. It exists. It can be built. It's a learning environment. It's sort of a growth mindset at the team level, but it has to be built. And the only reason I think this is important to say is that there's people get anxious that because they don't have it, it means they're deficient or their organizations are deficient. And I say no, you just have work to do.
Right. Okay, that is beautiful. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate your insights and your time, and it was wonderful to chat with you again after so many years. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, Amy, thank you so much. But I just want to say also congratulations on having such a significant impact and influencing, institutions and individuals at such a massive scale to be better people.
Thank you. That makes my day.
The feeling is mutual, Amy. Okay, let me now highlight and reinforce 3 of the insights from our conversation. The 3 points are focus on performance, focus on our vocabulary, and focus on learning and the future. So first, focus on performance. I want to reinforce first and foremost that the whole point here is performance. Amy mentioned that we love this psychological safety thing, but we have to care about performance. Yes, that's the whole point. Psychological safety is not about being comfortable and laissez-faire. It's not about rejecting feedback. It's not about weaponizing a woke excuse for performance. In fact, performance is the whole point. The research consistently demonstrates that a culture of psychological safety contributes to team performance. And accountability is critical. Even in Amy's research on failures, it's all about longer-term performance. As Amy said, the people who are the most successful, who are the highest performers, they're not the most successful because they're failure-free. Rather, their success and performance is because they've been willing to try hard things and to stomach the disappointment of failure. But it's a certain kind of failure, isn't it? She calls it intelligent failure, which brings me to the second point that I want to reinforce from our conversation. It's focusing on our vocabulary. In our conversation, I brought up the distinction between regret and disappointment. Regret is wishing that you'd done something differently. Disappointment is knowing that things didn't turn out quite the way you hoped, despite making the right decision at the time. This is analogous to Amy's intelligent failure. Amy started by distinguishing between mistakes and failures. A mistake is an unintended deviation from a known practice or process. A failure is an undesirable outcome. There are 3 kinds of failures: basic, complex, and intelligent. I bet you can guess which one of those 3 is a good one. A basic failure has a single cause. That cause is usually a mistake. You do something that you shouldn't have, and then there's a bad outcome. You text and drive, and you get into an accident. That is a basic failure. A complex failure has a handful of factors contributing to it. Intelligent failure is the undesired results of experiments. Think of a scientific experiment: hypothesis, action, undesired result, and learning. So, we encourage you to be careful of your vocabulary, knowing that as humans, we all fail at times, and yes, we all make mistakes. And we all experience disappointment, and yes, even regret. But if we consciously focus on taking smart risks, we can label our failures as intelligent failure and move on to learning. And this brings me to the last point that I want to reinforce. It's focusing on learning and the future. Ultimately, when we focus on learning and the future, we are cultivating a growth mindset. And this is incredibly powerful. This notion of cultivating a growth mindset, of focusing on the future and on learning, is a key theme running through all of Amy's work in psychological safety and in failing well. That reminds me, I loved how when I mentioned to Amy that I think most of the Talk About Talk podcast listeners have a growth mindset, there is self-selection here. Amy added that there are probably many listeners who are growth-minded curious. Probably true. If that might be you, know this. Inasmuch as the research on team performance consistently shows that psychological safety contributes to team performance, the research by Carol Dweck and others consistently shows that when you cultivate a growth mindset, when you focus on learning and the future, this can also improve your chance of success. I want to say thank you so much again to Amy. Your work really is contributing to a more productive, high-performing society, and a more enjoyable one too, might I add. As I said, you can find links to Amy's books as well as the other books and articles that we mentioned in our conversation right in the show notes for this episode. My coordinates are there too. Please connect with me anytime. You can check out the talkabouttalk.com website or send me a DM on LinkedIn. I love hearing from you. Thanks for listening and talk soon.